Florida is bracing for the wrath of Hurricane Helene, and a common question that scientists face during natural disasters like this is, has climate change impacted the severity of these storms? Let's bring in Jim Defede and Brian New, who are looking at the public perception of climate change in their states. Jim is an investigative reporter with CBS News Miami, and Brian is an investigative reporter with CBS News Texas. It is so great to be with both of you. Jim, I want to start with you. We have seen with major storms in the past, politicians demand help from the federal government, but then many of those same politicians will vote against climate change legislation. So how do they square those two positions?
Thank you for having me. And let me just sort of say, I think the timing of this is incredible with Hurricane Helene barreling down on Florida. You can expect that Governor DeSantis, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Rick Scott, as well as all the congressional delegation, particularly on the Republican side, will be demanding that the federal government come in and offer assistance. But at the same time, as you point out, they vote against many of the very same types of climate change legislation that might, at some point, mitigate some of these issues, might help with it. Now, they'll argue that whether some of these bills are the Inflation Reduction Act or the infrastructure bill, which both had hundreds of millions of dollars for climate change, they didn't like certain parts of it. But what really gets to the heart of it is climate change has become a partisan issue in a way that it's really, as I talk to different folks on both sides on this, they basically see anytime you mention climate change as it being a liberal thing. Now, this is very different from what it was back in 2008, 2009, when John McCain talked about this being a priority, and there was bipartisan support for it. But that bipartisan support is gone thanks largely to Donald Trump, who has dismissed climate change as something that's not real.
One thing that I saw over my years covering Capitol Hill, Jim, was that originally there were a lot of Republicans that felt pressured to say that climate change wasn't real. And many of them have now shifted to say either that it is real but not necessarily man-made, or that it is man-made but they don't think that there's much that governments could really do about it, or that it's not fair to ask the U.S. government to do something about it if governments overseas aren't doing as much or more. Is that a shift that you have seen at the state capitol there in Florida as well?
No, I think you've exactly nailed it. Republicans will argue, why should the United States put itself at a competitive disadvantage by limiting CO2 emissions when China and India, even bigger users, aren't doing the same thing? I understand that argument. And when you talk about, Republicans who used to deny climate, one of the people I've spoken to recently for this reporting is former South Carolina Congressman Bob Inglis, who was a climate change denier. And he said he basically denied it because at the time when he was in Congress in the 90s, Al Gore was for it. So therefore, he knew he had to be against it. He's now trying to change the perception. He formed a nonprofit group which is arguing that rather than talk about it in terms that Democrats tend to talk about it, there is a conservative argument to be made about how to tackle these climate change issues, and that if you can start to appeal to conservatives on economic grounds, that you have a better chance. So that's one of the interesting things that we're seeing, at least the discussion starting. But right now, Republicans mainly focus on mitigation without getting to the root causes of why we're seeing these severe storms.
That is so interesting. Brian, I want to turn to you now. You looked at how research shows nationally that there's a disconnect between public opinion on climate change on one hand and how elected officials vote and act on the issue on the other. Does that hold true in Texas as well?
It does. Even in red states like Texas, there's this disconnect. Research from Yale University shows that 64% of Texans are worried about global warming, and 55% believe that climate change should be a priority for the next president and Congress. And yet, many elected officials here in the state have not made addressing global warming a priority. We sat down with Dallas GOP chair, retired Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, to ask him about this apparent disconnect.
I would just like to see some very simple, reasonable minds that aren't trying to put people in one camp or the other. Just sit down and say, let's solve this thing.
So why isn't that happening?
Why isn't
Oh,
the
Brian,
climate...
you know why that's not
Why
happening.
is that not happening, that this is not a bridge issue?
Because when you're telling me that I have to, then for whatever reason, I'm going to hit the off switch. When you're telling me that I have to buy an EV, when you're telling me that I have to, have a different type of, washer dryer.
Brian, you also know that there's research that shows that compared to Democratic voters, climate issues are not as high of a priority for many Republicans. Do you find that to be the case in Texas, even after there have been several really vicious storms that have decimated parts of the state?
Yeah, we did find that to be the case, but not for everyone who traditionally votes Republican. We met Larry Howe, a lifelong Republican who lives in Plano, Texas. That's just north of Dallas. And Howe told us in recent years that he has struggled with who to vote for because the climate has become his top priority. Now, Howe recently attended a town hall meeting put on by Republican Congressman Pat Fallon. And in that meeting, Howe asked Fallon a question about whether he would support efforts to educate the public about the science of climate change. Fallon answered his question by saying Howe's idea was great, and then had this to say.
But let's be real about what we can. Not just say all these rainbowy things to get votes and to brainwash a generation with climate alerts.
He did spend several minutes talking about it.
Yeah, but again, I think it had more misleading information than information that would help bring us together. To me, that's what was missing.
Really interesting conversations. Jim Defede and Brian New, thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate it.